Matt Flynn is a former state Democratic Party chairman. He's a retired Milwaukee attorney, and he just announced that he's going to run for governor in 2018. Matt, thank you for joining us at WisconsinEye.
Good to be here.
When I interviewed you at the Democratic Convention on June 2nd, I didn't see Foxconn coming. I don't know if you did. So let's open it this way. That's been a huge development in Wisconsin politics. Now, you oppose that deal, right?
Correct.
Is it because of the amount of money involved, $2.85 billion? The Republicans say Democrats like you who oppose Foxconn are opposing family-supporting Wisconsin jobs. Your response?
Yeah, my response is this. I think Scott Walker got taken to the cleaners. 2.85, but then another 150 or so in other incentives. And then local contributions, sales tax, local contributions of hundreds of millions of dollars.
$764 million?
Yeah, it's almost $4 billion for, with no minimum job guarantees with a company that has, not necessarily lived up to its expectations in the past. So I think we paid too much. I would welcome foreign corporations, even any corporation, but it has to be right. And I don't think that Scott Walker and his team, frankly, had the ability and knowledge to negotiate it, to give almost $4 billion, much of it in cash, to a foreign company with no expectations other than, I hope. And then they came in and they said, we want to be exempted from wetland regulations and other water regulations. And then they wanted to have a direct appeal to the Supreme Court. And I've never seen that kind of accommodation given to any American business. This is really a Chinese business. I do not want them regulating the water in this country. I just think it was a bad deal. I would have negotiated a little tougher.
Well, how much would a Governor Flynn have offered Foxconn?
Well, North Carolina offered them about, I think, $700 million roughly. I don't think I would have offered them that. I would have said, look, come on in. We love to have you, but we have Mitchell Field, we have O'Hare nearby, Amazon, good water. You have to obey our laws like American companies. But then if push came to shove, I think I would give them something, but not even 10% of what they got. Frankly.
Let's fast forward to next June. If Foxconn has broken ground and they're building something of substance, and they've hired 300 to 400 people, does the fact that they've done those developments, does that hurt your campaign?
I don't think so, because I'll tell you this. I will live up to all contractual commitments. I'm not looking to somehow sabotage anything. I can tell you that I think that Scott Walker paid too much. I think he was desperate. I think he really wanted to show, quote, job creation and run some commercials next fall, because there's not going to be any true development in that project for many years. But no, I'll live up to our contractual commitments, but going forward, the state should know that I'm not going to enter into those kind of deals.
If you're the Democratic nominee, and one of the Governor Walker's ads says, you should re-elect me to be sure the Foxconn deal gets done, and if you elect Matt Flynn, it won't get done, your answer?
My answer is baloney, okay? Here's the deal, look. I believe in term limits, so does he. He's come to his term limit. It's 2 4-year terms. An election is a term limit. That's number one. He's had 8 years to do his vision. I think it's a flawed vision. So the Democrats now, I think, should have a turn to show what we can do. But secondly, I will honor contractual commitments, but I'm going to scrutinize very carefully what they do. And frankly, if they don't abide by their commitments, or they said something that was not true in their representations, then I'll take action on that.
So you would honor any deal between Weedick and Foxconn if you're elected governor?
Absolutely. I will not breach a contract. But contract law is complex, and it requires good faith on their side, too. And I'll be looking at that very carefully.
Between 2011 and now, the Republicans have enacted dozens of major policy changes. What do you think is the effect of their legacy? And I don't have to list the 40-plus major changes they've made.
The effect of their legacy is to dismantle over 100 years of accomplishment in Wisconsin, going from Fighting Bob La Follette to Warren Knowles to Pat Lucey, bipartisan. We used to have clean government, and now, quite frankly, I don't believe we do. We have people attacking open records. We have legislation being passed when no one's looking. We have a legislature that was passed with they get 60 seats in 2012, and they only got 48% of the vote. And we used to have clean water. Now people in Kewanee are drinking brown water. They're drinking bottled water. They're taking too much water out of this state. Water is not infinite. They've busted unions. There's a whole laundry list I could talk about. They're dismantling with the Wisconsin culture.
Well, you have been asked about Act 10. Act 10 came in two parts. The evisceration of the collective bargaining rights, and making public employees pay more for pensions and health care. Would you, as governor, submit to the legislature a complete reversal on both counts of Act 10?
I would totally repeal Act 10 for one reason.
Totally, on both
yes,
sides.
it's a taunting document. If you read it, it was deliberately put into effect. It's insulting to teachers and to public employees. But I do believe that teachers and public employees can fairly be asked to contribute to pension and health care. So what I would do is repeal it and then replace with something much better. And what that would be is they could collectively bargain, and I would get rid of all the taunting nonsense. But I would say to the teachers and I would say to the public employees, look, in private sector now, people do make contributions. I think it's fair that you do it, but we're going to set your compensation appropriately, because in the past they took lower compensation because they were getting all these benefits.
Well, the governor believes that public employees should pay 12% of health care costs. Do you like that number?
Well, I'm not prepared right now off the top of my head to say what the number should be. I would talk to experts, I would talk to the people in the public employees unions, and I'd talk to private sector employers whom I've represented in my practice for a long time, and I would come to something fair and comparable relative to their wages.
How would the first budget submitted by Governor Flynn pay for the long-term funding of our highways?
Right. The transportation budget right now, debt service is almost up to 20% of it. It used to be about 7 to 9% of it. And they are relying on, frankly, debt and neglect. You know, they're not even addressing some stretches of road in the state. For instance, a big highway in Milwaukee, right downtown, that's one of the most traveled in the country. I should say in the state. So what I would do is a combination of things. We've got to look at least some re-indexing of the gasoline tax. Okay. Now, perhaps not to the extent that we did in the past. It would have to be a holistic approach. But secondly, I don't like tolls. Third, I think trucks who abuse the road more than cars should pay something comparable. And then any vehicle that uses it. And so I would also accept federal transportation money. He turned out $800 million for trains. I would take every dollar I can get from the federal government. You would have accepted that? I would have accepted that, absolutely. But it's a combination of that. But I'm a pay-as-you-go governor. In other words, I'm not going to borrow 20% of the transportation budget.
Would your transportation budget raise the gas tax and or the $75 that you and I pay to register a vehicle?
Well, what it would do is it's a user fee, and so people who use the highway should pay. That's partially a re-indexing of the gas tax, not to the levels we did before. It's partially going to be a charge on trucks and on cars that don't necessarily use gasoline. And in terms of registration fees, I'd look at that last, quite frankly, because it's already somewhat high. But I think that people who use the roads pay for the roads.
Polls show some support for tolling. Why do you oppose it?
I oppose tolling for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're a state where you probably want the tolls at the Illinois border and the Minnesota border. That's going to get overturned in very expensive litigation unless you had it statewide. If you put tolls in the middle of our state, people are going to avoid the tolls. You know, they can sneak around them on country roads. They're not effective, and they're not cost effective in a state like Wisconsin, which is very large with our population scattered around the state.
You mentioned the reapportionment, and of course the U.S. Supreme Court's going to rule on the plan that was enacted in 2011. Would your budget call for setting up a nonpartisan panel to draw district lines?
Yes. In other words, I'm not looking to benefit.
You want to go to the Iowa model?
Absolutely, the Iowa model. No Democratic or Republican advantage. I'm not getting in there to try to jimmy it the other way. I think what the Republicans have done is wrong, more extreme than anybody's ever done, but enough's enough. I want an independent commission that's fair, and let us all take our chances.
What's been the legacy of the Walker administration on environmental issues, and how would you change the DNR?
Well, I think that the legacy is simply to turn over the environment to private industry and let them do whatever they want and drain water in the state and dirty the water and so on. What I would do is I'd strengthen the DNR the way it was even before Jim Doyle was governor, where you had a good, strong, independent DNR where hunters and fishermen knew where they stood and had a good environment, where we had clean water. In other words, none of these deep wells, and if you're going to take water out of our state, we are going to count what impact it has on nearby streams and rivers. Right now, they're prohibited from doing it. Foreign companies come in, they obey our water laws and our wetlands laws. We don't say they don't have to obey them, but Miller Brewing does. I mean, that's just not right. And in every respect, I'm an environmentalist. But it really is clean water. And clean water, clean air, and a clean environment, and I would restore that.
So you would not have signed the high-capacity wells bill passed by the Republicans?
Absolutely not. Not only would I not have, but then they have an opinion from the Attorney General who says, well, because the legislature hasn't said you can take into account the impact on neighboring streams and rivers, you can't do it. That's bad science. We have tremendous hydrologists at the University of Wisconsin and elsewhere. We should get the best expert opinion on the overall impact on water in the state.
The potato and vegetable growers say we needed that high-capacity well law. Your response?
Well, look, I like the potato growers. I like the vegetable growers. There's a way to do it in irrigation, but there's only so much water. And you have to take into account neighboring streams and rivers. If our experts, the state experts, you know, right now, industry experts are the ones writing these permits. So if the state experts said to me, in this particular region, we can do this, I would lean heavily on those experts. That's not happening right now.
So you support the recent decision by a Dane County judge saying the public trust doctrine in terms of our waterways trumps the, that's the wrong term, overturns
yes.
the recent law that said you don't have to consider the effect.
Yes, and that judge, Valerie Bailey-Reen, was a law partner of mine at my law firm and worked with me on cases. She's a good judge. She did the right thing.
Well, now I'm going to use the T word. In your video announcement, you said two things, that Mr. Trump's record threatens America and Scott Walker's record threatens our progressive tradition. Why did you lead with President Trump?
I led with President Trump because I don't think we've had a more dangerous president in my lifetime. I want the Russians out of our government and our foreign policy, and that means getting them out of the Republican Party, and Trump's the one who let them in. I don't think he's emotionally all there and mentally all there. And he's playing with nuclear weapons. This guy is bad news, and he is dividing our country and pitting Americans against Americans. I want him impeached. As far as Walker is concerned, he is a more disciplined version of Trump in this state, and what he is doing, he's not as extreme as Trump, but economically, he's trying to do the same things. He turned down Medicaid money. He's broken unions. Both they're a pair to draw to, both of them, and I want them out.
Well, you mentioned Medicaid. That's under threat in Washington by the Republicans.
Right.
Would your budget ever cut Medicaid services to the 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents?
Right. It's 1 in 5, and half of them are children. No, it wouldn't cut it, and I would accept Medicaid money from the federal government.
Would you raise taxes to protect Medicaid benefits to those?
I don't think that's necessary. The Republicans, first of all, they've turned down federal money, hundreds of millions. Those are our federal tax dollars.
Would you reapply for that as governor?
Absolutely. I'd be out there lobbying, and I'd say, give it to us. Absolutely.
Even though the MA funding is under such threat in Washington?
I'd take a coach aircraft seat, go out there, walk up and do the job myself. I would lobby them, absolutely. Look, I was in the Navy. There are bases all over the South. There are space centers all over. We get nothing. So they give us a little train money and some Medicaid money, and we turn it down. That's our federal tax dollars. It just went to other states. It didn't go to reduce any deficit. We want it. I want it in the state.
The Office of the Commissioner of Insurance just announced that for those that buy health care on the individual marketplace, average increase of 36%. If you were governor, could you do anything to lower that? How would you try to protect those that are now buying on that marketplace from a 36% increase?
Those are unconscionable increases. Part of it is the uncertainty being injected by Trump and Walker, quite frankly. Trump knew what he was doing. When he yanked some of these subsidies for lower income people, if you're a rational insurance executive, you're not a heartless person necessarily, but you say, hey, look, I've got to run a business here, and I have a CEO doing that, in effect, the CEO of the country, Trump. He's destabilizing it. And here in Wisconsin, Scott Walker said, I'm going to turn down it'll end up being about $1 billion over time of Medicare subsidies, and I'm going to turn that down because, you know why he did it? Because John Kasich and Chris Christie took it, and they were his opponents running for president. And so Ohio and New Jersey took it. We're not going to take it. Some 80,000 people were thrown off. Now, they could have gone through the exchanges, but only a third of them did. Some of them are going to die. I mean, they're not going to get blood pressure medication, checkups, statins. Then they're going to need an ambulance for a heart attack to the hospital, which we'll all pay for, and it's more expensive. The Republicans are looking at this as pawns in a chessboard, not as human beings and any rational health care system.
New subject. Would you have signed the bill allowing Wisconsin residents to conceal carry with a permit?
I'm a strong believer in the citizens and in the Second Amendment. But not only would it have to have a permit, but I don't want jihadists with weapons. I don't want people who kill our Marines with weapons. I don't want international cartels and drug gangs with weapons. So when they won't bar people, for instance, on the no-fly list, or take into account felons and take into account enemies of the United States, I will not arm enemies of the United States. I will kill enemies of the United States. That's my approach. I'm a Navy guy. That's the way I look at it.
Well, but gun control is such a national issue. Is there anything we can do in the state of Wisconsin to ease some of these shots fired, the murder rate, the homicide rate in Milwaukee?
Right.
What?
I would ban automatic weapons, and I would ban semi-automatic weapons because they can be turned into automatic weapons. If you've ever fired even a semi-automatic weapon, that can kill a lot of people. The Supreme Court has shown a disposition when states do something rational, as long as they show a commitment to the Second Amendment, to uphold it. And they're starting to do that right now. And I would say in Wisconsin, I want people to be able to carry with permits, good citizens, but I don't want jihadists, drug cartels, and international gangs doing it, and I don't want people walking around with the equivalent of submachine guns.
In the Capitol right now, they're debating an open carry law. You don't support that?
No, well, not only that, because there's no permit involved with some of this stuff.
That's true.
Absolutely not. I mean, I don't want some guy walking, no. Criminals, no, I don't want them having it.
There's a debate over whether Wisconsin should help in the student debt crisis. And some Democratic legislators have a bill saying you should be able to refinance that debt. Your position?
I think refinance is a good idea, but I go one step further. Scott Walker has attacked the University of Wisconsin system financially, and he's insulted them publicly for a long time. I would considerably increase funding to the University of Wisconsin system, to the flagship in Madison, the Berkeley of our system, to the UCLA of our system and UWM, and to the whole system. My dad was on the faculty for 34 years at UWM. I think that by reducing the need for tuition and increasing public funding, that can help the most. But in the short run, yes, absolutely, I would help them refinance.
Ray Cross, president of the system, who I interviewed this morning, he last week proposed realigning the two-year colleges, making them part of the four-year universities. Do you support that plan?
I've not studied it, but I trust Ray Cross. When I heard him, because I've heard him speak on this before, it's a declining enrollment. So I think ultimately he's a solid guy. And so he's an expert. And so what I would say is I have a great deal of trust in Ray Cross. I know there's decline in enrollment. I don't countenance shutting down any of these centers, and if that's the way to do it, that's the way to do it.
What would your first budget do to choice, which has just exploded in cost?
Right, school
in
choice.
Terms of school choice, in terms of impact on property taxes and state aid, GPR.
Right. I believe strongly in public education, and so I am aware that in Milwaukee in particular and Racine, there are a lot of reasons that may not apply statewide for the voucher and the charter system, and I'm not going to put an end to that where it's worked for kids. And
just in those two communities?
Well, those are the two communities where it is now. It's now expanding statewide.
Statewide.
I would be much more, I think, conservative and much more, give far greater scrutiny to that, and my emphasis is on public education.
Well, let's stay with that a little bit. So
Sure.
You would continue choice for Milwaukee, choice for the city of Racine, and shut down the statewide program?
I would not shut down the statewide program.
You would not?
No.
Would you expand it?
I would not expand it. I would want to study it further and decide where it's going. I don't see the need for choice to go statewide at this pace that it's going right now.
You practice in Milwaukee. What would be the best way that state government can help improve the graduation rates and the dropouts at Milwaukee Public Schools?
Right. First of all, Milwaukee sends $400 million a year more to Madison than it gets back from Madison. There's a conception out there that we're supporting Milwaukee. That's not true. It's the economic engine of the state. But I have relatives in Monroe, Random Lake, Hayward, Middleton, all around the state. So I'm a statewide candidate. However, I know Milwaukee well because I live in Milwaukee. And what has happened in Milwaukee is there has been a terrible segregation of the city, within the city, of the inner city population. Mm-hmm. And the reason for choice over there had been to basically reintegrate schools where some of these kids could go to schools with a more diverse population. What I would do is, first of all, I live there, I'm a fan of it, I know the people in Milwaukee. I have gone to the churches in the inner city on Sundays for a long, long time, and the ministers are very, very kind to me, and they've let me speak. And I'm a champion of Milwaukee. I'm a champion of the people in Milwaukee, especially in the inner city as well, who have faced hard circumstances in life. There are, Mayor Tom Barrett, who's a friend of mine, is doing a very, very good job reaching out for economic development. There's a fellow named Dan Bader, who is a wonderful philanthropist over there. And I know Dan, and I know Corey Nettles, who runs the fund where they're investing in the city. I'm excited about the city of Milwaukee. The fact is, though, that with a lot of those schools, they're basically neglected. The Republicans, they want to drug test welfare recipients, for instance, or food stamp. I think that's wrong. It's insulting. Some of them want to drug test anybody who's in an extracurricular sport in the state. I think that's wrong. Some Republican legislators have insulted them, said these schools are no good. I'm tired of their insults. As a Milwaukee guy and a Wisconsin guy, as governor of the state, I will stand up for Milwaukee and I'll say to the Republican Party, give us your moderate Republicans, like you used to have, who are caring people. I'm a caring person, and we're going to work hard to improve the schools in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee Mayor Barrett asked for permission to levy an additional half-cent sales tax to protect some of his key programs, including the hiring of police. Would you have supported that?
Well, the answer is I support Tom Barrett, and yes. However, the reason Tom Barrett did it is because they've cut aides to Milwaukee. That should not have occurred. And so, as governor of the state, I'm going to look around, and part of it is because they're trying to reduce the taxes on the highest income people in the state by almost half, from 7% to 3%. I would put in a budget with a fair tax structure that reduces taxes on the middle class and lower income people, but has fair share paid by people with assets. And Tom only did that because he has no money. The fact is more money should have gone to Milwaukee, which I would do. But if push came to shove, I would defer to Tom's judgment, yes.
You just talked about some changes you'd make in the state's tax structure.
Right.
Would you get rid of the manufacturing and ag credit?
Yes.
Why?
Because right now that was put into effect only because it doesn't even necessarily have to have an impact on employment in the state. It was just done to say, oh, a manufacturer. I've represented manufacturers in my practice for a long, long time. I know them. They're wonderful people. But they did not need that to be incentivized to do what they're doing in Wisconsin. And it doesn't have a correlation to employment. It's simply, frankly, a gimmick in my view. So I would overhaul the tax code. And quite frankly, what I do is, and I'm not coming at this sort of as a starry-eyed guy. I know the area. And people who know, it'd be nice to have no taxes. We're going to have some taxes. Who's going to pay them? The property tax is a regressive tax. I don't like it. Poor and middle income people pay a disproportionate share compared to everybody in society. I'd sit down with the Wisconsin manufacturers. I'd sit down with the labor unions and say, give me your input, and I'd come up with a fair program.
When you announced, you said that overturning the right to work law would be one of your goals. Why?
Right. It would be one of my first goals. Right to work is a pseudonym for lower wages. I want to see employees be able to collectively bargain. And they can't do it if people don't support their union while they're doing it. There are many, many employers I know who are very happy to negotiate with their unions. And so that was a gimmick, like they did in Michigan, to simply bust unions. It lower wages in the state. I want to see higher wages in every county in this state. But I also want to see corporations make money. Henry Ford, people forget this, suddenly started to pay, and he was anti-labor, but he started to pay his employees $5 a day when everybody else was paying $2.50 a day. He said, Henry, what are you doing? He said, I want my employees to be able to afford to buy my cars. 70% of our GDP is consumer spending. By sucking money out of consumers, all you're doing is lowering the profitability of the whole, lowering the wealth of the whole country and state. I want to see more economic activity, higher wages, higher profits.
Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance last week was out with a plan saying the area of northern Wisconsin, north of Highway 29, is going to have the toughest economic future. What are your thoughts on helping rural Wisconsin, including some of those rural schools where kids are on a bus from 60 to 90 minutes going one way?
I know that area. I've driven through it. I have relatives in Hayward. I had relatives in Jump River when my sister taught in Ladysmith at Mount Scenario College before it closed. And I know the area well. And there's very little economic activity up there proportionately relative to the southern part of the state. So a kid grows up in one of those towns, unless you get a job with the state or the government, a teacher or a prison guard or something like in Red Granite, what are you going to do? Well, how do you bring money back there? For one thing, Scott Walker turned down, well, darn near $2 billion in train money and Medicaid money. And I don't mean to harp on it, but money churns through society. If $2 billion comes in, it's earned, spent, earned, spent, earned, spent. People open up shops, they open up restaurants, it's economic activity. This Republican government, in my view, has put a skeleton claw on wages on the economy and pushed it down, thinking they're boosting corporate profits. They're not boosting corporate profits. Henry Ford knew that. If they could afford to buy more, everybody would do better. So what I would do is, I'm very excited about this. In a way, there's part of Tommy Thompson that I admired, and that is, he was for Wisconsin. He was for Madison, the Badgers, the Packers. So am I. And I want to see everybody make more money, but it has to start with wage earners making more money.
Wisconsin has the highest incarceration rate for African Americans. How would you change that?
I think that there should be much shorter prison sentences and no prison sentences for nonviolent crimes, but shorter ones for everything else. I have proposed in the past a financial impact statement. If a judge wants to, it's about, say, $25,000, $35,000 a year to keep him. If you want to sentence somebody to 40 years, you have to put in, it will cost the state $1 million or $1.2 million. Now, does it have to be 40 years? Could 22 years really send this person a message? Not for rape, for vicious rapists and murderers, no. But for some of this stuff, somebody carjacks a car or something, they get 30 years. I mean, it's a terrible thing that he did, but there should be a financial impact statement, and these mass incarcerations have got to stop.
You've campaigned for office 4 times, and then you've run the state Democratic Party, so you've done budgets.
Right.
What's your budget for the primary and budget for the general? How much do you need to compete with Governor Walker, who's going to have a pretty deep treasury?
Governor Walker will have infinite number of money if he wants it, because if he loses, that's going to send a signal to the Republicans nationwide. So our budget, I'm not about to sit here and tell the enemy what all we're doing, but it's going to certainly
be competitive.
Yeah, it's going to be competitive. It won't be the money that, we don't have the Koch brothers, and we don't have some of these billionaires. I mean, there are billionaires in the Democratic Party, but they aren't shining around Matt Flynn right now. I can tell you that right now. But what I have is a lot of people around this state, and we have a website up, and the money's coming in very well. I declared last Tuesday, it's been like a week, and I've been amazed at the amount of money that's come in. So we're going to spend it prudently, we're going to use a lot of volunteers, and we're going to be absolutely competitive with Scott Walker.
Okay, almost out of time. Two final questions. Why are you the most qualified of the 7 other candidates? Because some have said, because he's won statewide, Tony Evers kind of is the early leader. Why are you more qualified than the other 7?
Well, I don't want to say anything bad about the others. I like Tony Evers. I like all the rest of them. There's one issue in this race, Steve. Who can beat Scott Walker? That's the one issue. And when people look at me, they look at Tony and everyone else and hear us. Who can best prosecute the case against Scott Walker? Matt Flynn can prosecute. I'm a Navy veteran. I fought hard for the Democratic Party all my life. I like Tony. He was an independent in his position in terms of what he was elected to. He had some nice things to say about the Walker budget. I have no nice things to say about the Walker budget. And I will get out there, and it'd be nice to say, let the lion lie down with the lamb. That's going to work in the future. That's not working right now. We need a fighter in there.
Okay, and finally, I want to give you a chance to this statement from the Republican Party spokesman when you announced Matt Flynn, and this is their words, not mine. Matt Flynn is a dirty defense attorney who has built a career on defending special interests and those who prey on Wisconsin families. A reference to you representing the Archdiocese of Milwaukee.
I've been a partner in Quarles & Brady, which is one of the finest firms that's represented many of the donors of the Republican Party. So if he's calling me a dirty defense lawyer, he should check with his clients. The second thing, though, is on the Archdiocese of Milwaukee.
Yes, sir. When
those cases came up, they pained me more than I can tell you. They were terrible. We have represented the Archdiocese for about 50 years. And I know the Archdiocese does good work, and most priests are very fine people. So my job was to go in and clean it up, and I think I made a difference. Because we went in, I can't say all the advice I gave, but there's been no retransferring of problem priests since I represented them, and there's been no recurrence of that conduct. I came in to clean it up. I can't go back to the 60s and undo what happened. It was terrible. But I could clean it up.
Matt Flynn, the latest Democratic candidate for governor, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Steve. Good talking to you.
Thank you.